Hello and welcome to our second Newsbreak Chats for the year. I'm Camille Elamia, your host. Newsbreak is the in-depth and investigative arm of Rappler. And today we will be joined by three of my co-reporters, Rambo Talabong, who has been following the government's bloody drug war, Pia Ranada, who is covering Malacanang and President Rodrigo Duterte, and Lian Buan, our justice reporter who follows the Supreme Court and the Department of Justice. So ngayon, tsaka kahapon, we published a series of investigative reports showing how the Duterte government has tried to delay or stall the proceedings dun sa drug war sa Supreme Court by first and foremost submitting trash. Of course, not quite literal, but somehow close to that. Maybe Lian and Rambo can tell us more about it. So, just a brief background before we discuss this issue. December 2017 pa, inutusan ng Supreme Court ang Office of the Solicitor General, which serves as the lawyer of the government, to submit documents relating to the drug war. Pero until now, hindi pa tatapos. And ito nga yung laman ng unang nilabas na investigative report ng Rappler, the first submission of the OSG, they're filled with rubbish documents, as they called it. Lian and Rambo are part of the investigative team that worked on it. So Lian and Rambo, maybe you can share with us what kinds of rubbish documents talaga to. So we have an idea.
Okay, so maybe I'll start. So we got a copy of the first submission of the government to the Supreme Court, and we were so excited when we got it because it would help us look at the documentation of the drug war, and we were hoping to do an independent assessment of how the drug war was conducted, specifically yung mga nanlaban cases or the deaths in police operations. But much to our disappointment, which was not really a surprise to me when I got it na, is how the files were trash. Ang word ng petitioner ng Center Law sa kanya ay rubbish. So bakit when you look at the files, there are so many files, like 165,000 files scattered in different folders. Pero pag binuksan yung mga folder, they are redundant. So it's the same folder occurring in the same subfolders in the same volume. So parang hindi mo alam kung how many of the 165,000 ay doble-doble lang of the same files. And then the files belong to 55 different provinces. So syempre ang una naming instinct ay to look at Metro Manila, which was the epicenter of the start of the drug war of President Duterte. But again, much to our disappointment, walang Metro Manila sa folders. And I asked Rambo, ano ba yung mga hotspot as identified by the PNP? And he gave us a list of hotspot. And ang nakita lang namin na hotspot dun sa folders ay Negros Occidental, Davao City, and Bulacan. Siguro I move further, siguro Rambo can discuss what he saw sa Davao because he looked at Davao while I looked at Bulacan and another member looked at Negros. Rambo?
I think something that I want to emphasize here, Camille, is that this might be one of the biggest incidents of not following direction of the government for the Supreme Court. Sobrang basic ng hinihingi ng Supreme Court sa Duterte government. Documentation ng 3,000 killings within 2016 to 2017. So drug-related killings, super basic. Police killings in drug operations. 3,000 lang hinihingi ng Supreme Court, pero ang pinasa ng Duterte government, isang latak ng mga documents na hindi naman related dito sa hinihingi ng Duterte ng Supreme Court. At nabanggit nga ni Lian, kung sinabi mo 3,000 killings related to the drug war, unang papasok sa isip mo, syempre, ang mga hotspots. So Manila, Bulacan, Davao City, Central Luzon. Pero tinignan namin yung mga hotspots na yan. Nakita rin namin mga latak ng dokumento na hindi naman related dito sa hinihingi ng Supreme Court. So talagang kita-kita na not following directions at nakakapag-delay ng proseso. Napaka-laking paglabag dito sa hiningin ng Supreme Court, itong unang submission ng Duterte government. Kasi gusto malaman ng Supreme Court kung talaga bang maayos yung pagkakagawa ng mga drug operations. Pero yung mga documents na pinasa, kung ano-ano mga incidents, kami may nakita kaming mga pagtataga, may mga love triangle kami nakita. May nakita rin kami mga katawan na nakita kung saan-saan napatay na hindi naman related sa hinihingi ng Supreme Court. At in effect, hindi rin siya nakakapagbigay ng tamang impormasyon sa publiko dahil itong mga documents naman ito ay para rin sa publiko, di ba? Para malaman kung ano ba talaga nangyayari sa drug war. Pero ang ginawa ng Duterte government, nagtambak ng dokumento. As in ang ginawa lang ng Philippine National Police, pinagpasa mga police station kung ano yung mga patayan sa kanilang mga areas at yun yung umakyat sa Supreme Court. Nakita namin at talagang nalito kami bakit ito ang mga dokumentong pinasa ng Duterte government, bakit hindi ito nakakatulong sa nangyayaring proceedings sa Supreme Court at hindi ito nakakatulong sa kung ano naman talaga ba legal ang drug ng Duterte government.
So, which leads me now to my next question. How could they get away with this? It's the Supreme Court. It's the highest court of the land which ordered them to do that. Pero harap-harapan na ganitong ginagawa. Or wala bang magagawa yung Supreme Court dito? Kasi ultimately, ang magsasubmit naman yung gobyerno talaga.
That is also my question, Camille. Bakit pinayagang makapag-submit ng basura ang OSG sa Supreme Court? At nung September 2019, nung nakita ng center law, nung petitioner na bakit ang basura nitong first submission ng Supreme Court, they filed a motion to hold the OSG in contempt of court. Parang sinasabi nila, pambabastos to sa korte, pagsasayang sa oras ng korte, at pagsasayang sa oras namin. Kasi December 2017 nyo pa hiningi yung mga dokumento at ang dami nang ang motion. Parang una, ayaw ibigay kasi national security daw. Pangalawa, ayaw silang bigyan ng kopya dahil wala naman daw silang, they have no business looking into files na hindi naman kliyente nila yung sangkot, ganun. Finally, nung the Supreme Court put its foot down at sinabing bigyan nyo, mag-submit kayo ng copy at bigyan nyo ng copy mga petitioner, nakita ng Center Law at ng Free Legal Assistance Group, wala silang mga kwenta, they're irrelevant. Kaya pinapakontempt sana nila ang OSG. Nakita natin sa records ng Supreme Court na sumagot ang OSG dun sa request for contempt ng Center Law. Ang sabi nila, meron lang daw hindi pagkakaintindihan. Kasi daw, throughout the proceedings, the Supreme Court and the petitioners has always mentioned the term DUI, deaths under investigation. At sa pulis daw, sa utak ng pulis, kapag sinabi mong DUI, hindi lang naman daw yan drug war killings, whether nanlaban or vigilante. Ang DUI daw sa pulis, basta lahat ng patayang iniimbestigahan mo pa. Sabi ng OSG, nilinaw naman daw nila sa PNP na ang gusto lang ng Supreme Court ay drug war DUIs. Pero siguro sa pag-relay ng mga instruction, sa bureaucracy, sa pagbaba ng mga instruction, nawala daw, lost in translation na yung sinabi ng OSG na, drug war files lang yung gusto namin Tinanong ko tungkol dito si Attorney Ray Paulo Santiago ng Ateneo Human Rights Center at sabi niya, madali lang naman yun Gaano ba kadaling linawin na DUI drug war files lang It didn't have to take that long and it didn't have to take a motion for contempt for you to clarify na, nagkamali pala kami. So after sumagot ng OSG, noong November 2019, nag-submit ng supplemental memorandum ang Center Law noong February 2020 at ninote lang ito ng Korte Suprema noong March at we have confirmed with the Supreme Court that March 3 action noting the Memorandum of Center Law was the last action ever in this case which has run for almost 4 years.
Pero kung sinasabi mo nga, di ba, na ang excuse nila ay DUI to. Pero kung DUI, di ba, it covers all kinds of killings. Pero wala pa rin doon yung mga relevant to the case. Di ba, parang subset siya. Bakit ganun? Is this like, the way it appears to me, it could be an excuse.
Yes, Camille, correct. Kasi kung sinasabi nga nilang DUI covers all killings, sana nandun yung mga nanlaban. At marami tayong mga nanlaban na wala doon. Kaya nga sabi ng Center Law, this is a stonewalling machination. Parang pinapaikot-ikot nyo lang kami. Then again, babalik tayo sa tanong mo na, bakit hindi sila pinarusahan or at least dinisiplina ng Supreme Court? Well, we cannot close the doors, hindi pa naman tapos ang kaso, but the fact remains that the last action was March 3, 2020, just noting the centerless petition, and maybe Rambo could add more.
And maybe just
Go, Camille.
Well, maybe just a follow-up na rin. Rambo, do you think there was a deliberate effort to conceal or talagang wala lang talagang data yung government on a flagship program ng gobyerno mismo, ng presidente mismo?
Mm-hmm. A few things, Camille. First thing I wanted to emphasize na sobrang laking butas dito sa mga kasong to. Wala ang Metro Manila. Imagine, Metro Manila, first 6 months of the Duterte administration, sobrang obvious na napakaraming patayan sa Metro Manila, napakaraming international media na pumunta pa sa Pilipinas, napakaraming litratan lumabas sa ating mga dyaryo na maraming patayan sa Maynila. Wala ni isang file dun sa unang submission nila. So, talagang not following. Hindi ko alam kung paano sila nakatakas dito, pero talagang hindi ito sinubmit. Ang tanong na kung paano nila ito ginawa, humingi kami ng comments sa PNP pa ulit-ulit sa kanilang spokesperson, sa kanilang hepe kung sino nagmamanage itong files, sa Bulacan Police at sa Central Luzon Police. Ang sinabi nila, sumunod naman daw sila sa utos ng Supreme Court. So sa pagkakaintindi nila, sinundan nila yung instruction. Babalik tayo dun sinabi ni Lia na baka DOI lang hinihingi. Pero ang kasunod na tanong doon, bakit butas pa rin? Kung ang pinasa nyo ay mga DUI, bakit napakalaking mga butas na nawawala sa inyong submission sa Supreme Court? At ito yung mga tanong na hindi nila sasagot.
So like can you give us like a brief story lang kasi ang dami mo nang nagawang data story about ito sa drug war. Every time ba humihingi ka, laging kulang-kulang yung nakukuha mong detalye?
I think depende sa police station, Camille. For example, nakakahingi tayo nung panahon ng 2019 sa patayan sa Bulacan. Ganun tayo dito nakuha doon. Kaya nakita natin na may uptick talaga sa patayan sa Central Luzon noong 2018. Pero nakikita rin natin na yung public information at saka transparency ng PNP ay nakabatay pa rin sa pakikitungo ng Pangulo sa ating mga mamamahayan, pati sa mga human rights investigators. Kaya nung ang Pangulo ay biglang naging antagonistic sa atin at saka sa human rights activists at saka investigators, sinarahan na nila yung ating access. Mas restrictive sa ating access. Yung kanilang real numbers count, hindi na rin masyadong updated. Nakita nga natin na kulang ng higit 2,000 mga patayan ang real numbers count ng Duterte government kasi hindi sobrang updated, hindi nila pinaprioritize itong transparency ng anti-drug campaign. So, Camille, kasama to sa isang malaking framework at saka isang malaking narrative kung saan ang Duterte government sa drug war talaga transparent. At lang to sa fatalities, itong fatality for actual credible count, credible tallying, credible data gathering of drug war. Ito sa mga fatalities ng drug war.
Pia, Rambo mentioned President Duterte and you have been really following him since the campaign pa. And hindi naman ito yung first time na yung operation against war against drugs niya na-imbestigahan. Kasi sa Davao pa lang, di ba, yung DPS, na-imbestigahan na yun ni Senator Laila de Lima. So now my question is, meron bang role si President Duterte na nakikita ka dito sa pagkakaroon ng pagtatago ng national government in terms of the drug war documents?
Definitely, I think may kinalaman si Duterte dito kasi alam naman natin since the beginning of his presidency, in fact, since he ran for president, very consistent na yung messaging niya to the police and to the military na I will protect you no matter what. As long as you help me in my drug war, I will even pardon you and promote you if you help in my drug war. So, nag-evolve yung messaging niya until in 2017, dun sa State of the Nation address niya, sinabi niya categorically na kung ayaw ko kayong if I tell you that you should not get investigated, then you will not be investigated. So very clear messaging to, not just to the military or the police, but even to all other investigating bodies like the CHR, even maybe lawmakers who he was addressing in the SONA, that if I don't want my policemen to talk, if I don't want my military to talk, they will not talk. Because I am doing this to protect them. So, yun yung spin niya na he's actually doing this to protect his loyal men in uniform and not really, syempre yung spin niya is not to say that I am protecting myself, I am protecting my reputation. Syempre, he's making it seem like he's doing it to protect his men, his cavalry. So, yun yung naging messaging niya. And we already heard lots of other government officials down the line repeat this policy as if to say that yung verbal order na yun is the official order that is keeping them from sharing these documents. For example, when si Catalino Cuy was the DILG officer in charge, sinabi talaga niya yun in September 2017, a few months lang after the SONA, that kaya hindi namin sinishare yung documents sa CHR kasi sinabi ni Pangulo na wag gawin yon. He doesn't agree with the policy of giving those documents to the CHR. And then Duterte yung Malacanang even clarified that in fact Duterte only meant he just wanted first to know ahead of time kung may request for documents yung mga investigating bodies. But through time though, we saw Duterte evolve. In 2018, when the ICC said that they would begin a preliminary examination of his drug war, a few months later, he suddenly withdrew. He suddenly said, "Ande, magwi-withdraw yung Philippines from ICC." So we can see him getting more brazen in the way he is trying to evade probes. And till now, diba, like just a few weeks ago, a few months ago, we saw him telling the PSG not to participate, not to attend Senate hearings about the vaccination, their illegal vaccination. So, diba, parang as he as the presidency progresses, we see him also being more brazen in his confidence that I can evade probes and I will not be held accountable for it.
So Pia, you mentioned the ICC, ano? And isang crucial factor dito sa pag-iimbestiga ng ICC is if they see that the government does not act on any of the complaints, any of the alleged human rights violations and all that. So Lian, how will this boost the ICC case against President Duterte?
The ICC level now is a preliminary examination at para makamove on siya to the proper phase of investigation, it must establish jurisdiction. At magkakaroon lang ng jurisdiction ng ICC if it proves that the Philippine local system is unable and unwilling to investigate these killings on its own. Ang sinabi ng mga advocates for an ICC investigation, paano magiging willing and able ang Pilipinas na imbestigahan at i-prosecute ang mga killing na to? Wala nga kayong dokumento at walang police report. I mean, in any investigation, anything that goes to a court trial, you would need documents, you would need files. But if the national government can't produce these, either nawawala nila, hindi nila maayos, or wala talaga, then that says a lot about the willingness and the ability of the Philippine local system to investigate and prosecute and eventually hold people accountable for all these killings.
Just for para familiar yung mga tao, kailan na ba yung next step? Kailan natin malalaman?
Okay, we have confirmed with the ICC Office of the Prosecutor that they are still on track to making a decision in the first half of 2021. That was supposed to be by the end of 2020, pero dahil alam naman nating lahat nagka-pandemic, so that affected the Office of the Prosecutor's procedures. So sabi nila, first half daw of 2021, magkakaroon sila ng determination kung mag-o-open sila ng investigation. If Prosecutor Fatu Bensouda does that, or even the new prosecutor, Karimban, ang mangyayari, aakyat na siya sa pre-trial chamber ng ICC, nandun na yung mga judge, at yung mga judge na ang magde-decide kung mag-i-issue ba sila ng summon, subpoena, or even arrest orders against state leaders. Hindi natin alam, kasi President Duterte, General Bato de la Rosa, perhaps. Named respondents were also Justice Secretary Vitaliano Aguirre and Solicitor General Jose Calida, and some of the more high-level officials that were named respondents in so many communications to the ICC.
Pia, about Malacanang naman, are there any news or information about how they're preparing for like a possible formal investigation aside from what you mentioned earlier na nag-withdraw nga from the ICC, from the Rome Statute ng Philippines?
Alam ko na during the time that yung ICC was preparing its finding, diba, launching that preliminary examination, si Duterte had a meeting with presidential spokesman Harry Roque in the Malacanang Golf Clubhouse precisely to talk about the examination and what it would mean for his administration. And alam natin that si Harry Roque, diba, after that he styled himself as the presidential assistant advisor for human rights. Kasi I think the strategy was precisely to, of course, we know that he eventually withdrew the Philippines from the ICC, but also to say na, gumagana naman yung sistema, the justice system is on track to providing a scrutiny over the drug war. And in fact, Duterte even has a presidential advisor on human rights. So parang it's all about creating this image, this narrative that even if Duterte is very brazen in his language, diba, very violent siya in his language, it's just rhetoric. Parang yun yung strategy nila. Parang he's just doing that to kind of intimidate criminals. He's doing it as a messaging strategy na but he doesn't really mean it. Parang yun yung nagiging narrative ng Malacanang. And even Duterte himself would say that in speeches right after issuing kill threats, sasabihin niya, oh, pero maniwala kayo dyan sa mga human rights. Ano ko lang to, parang I have every right to express my anger towards these criminals and I'm doing this to protect the nation. So yun yung strategy nila basically. To create this image that they're doing something about it. There are mechanisms working, but at the same time to defend Duterte's expressions as just expressions and not really, you cannot trace daw any link between Duterte himself and the person who pulled the trigger or wrapped the body in packaging.
Pia, ikaw kilala mo si President Duterte. Do you think may takot sa kanya? Or baliwala lang tong investigation na to ng ICC?
I think may takot sa kanya to. I think may impact ito sa kanya in terms of after his presidency. I mean, he knows that he may hold all of the cards now because he is the chief executive, but he knows and he's been thinking about the end of his term and what that would mean for him, and not only him but his allies, Bongo, Ronald De La Rosa, 'di ba? We know how ang laki ng reaction niya when his allies are targeted, like nung Magnitsky Act, when De La Rosa was revoked, yung visa niya was revoked. Ang laki ng reaction ni Presidente. He even went so far as to threaten to scrap the, not just threaten, but to actually the starting the process of scrapping the VFA. So definitely big deal to sa kanya. He may hide it in speeches. He may pretend that he may be parang medyo arrogant yung kanyang dating na, oh, I'm going to slap the ICC prosecutor if she comes here. But that's actually an indication that he's been thinking about it enough to talk about it in his speeches, and enough to even mull what kind of threat, diba, he will issue, what colorful language he will use to frighten the prosecutors and the ICC judges. So yeah.
Thank you. Lian, Rambo, kayo, let's go back to your story. Medyo matagal nyo din trinabaho to and you work as a team, di ba? For you, each of you, what was the biggest challenge for you in doing this story? Let's go with Rambo first.
For me, it's really going through the garbage. Imagine, tinignan talaga namin yung mga documents, kung ano yung pinakamahalaga, kung meron ba kami may extract. Meron naman kami nakuha analysis, pero yun talagang process of going through it one by one, reading them one by one, and also reading the killings. Meron pa nga kaming team member na talagang nato-traumatize ng kita niya mga litrato na hindi naman siya related to drug war. So may mga gory photos, meron mga details na kailangan pa namin babasa para lang may chance na may lagay sa aming spreadsheet, pero hindi naman talaga siya magagamit kasi hindi nga talaga siya useful. Talagang parang stockpiles lang siya ng government dito sa patayan. So it's really that tedious process of going through the files one by one. And I think it was worth it. Kasi hindi rin naman namin masasabi na talagang basura yung pinasa nila kung hindi namin inisa-isa.
Lian?
Siguro sa akin, I could personally say one of the hardest was yung, alam mo, yung introspection. Kasi you go into it head on na I want to investigate the drug war, and you work to get those copy, and finally pag napunta na sa'yo, oh shucks, it's trash. So alam mo yung the shock, the disbelief, and like reconciling all these feelings, and then once you get over that, you have to prepare yourself mentally and emotionally na, okay, this may be rubbish but I have to go through them kasi if I don't, then wala tayong mapapala dito. And sabi nga ni Rambo, there were, in the pandemic of 2020, when all of us were busy, sorting through our personal lives, navigating through the coronavirus lockdown, and investigating other stories related to the lockdown that is not related to the drug war, yung pagkatapos ng trabaho mo at 5 p.m., hindi pa tapos ang trabaho mo kasi titingin ka pa ng folders ng patayan, magbabasa ka pa ng spot report of gory details, titignan mo pa yung litrato, magbabasa ka pa ng affidavit na napakalabos, minsan, alam mo yun, babasahin mo yung accounts ng mga pamilya na ayaw nang magsampa ng kaso, and things like that. And to go through all of that, hundreds of them, and then going through them again to double check, and then going through them again to index it, all the while saying na, saan natin dadalhin tong storyang to kasi basura naman yung files. So that for me was a very particularly difficult part of investigating this story.
Grabe, ang hirap pala ng pinagdaanan nyo. So now, just to connect to our next topic, which is also related to another front of the government war. I remember lang, this question is for Pia. I remember before start ng campaign ni President Duterte, and nung term niya, ang messaging was against drug addicts, right? But now, we're seeing na ang agenda nila, naman, against communists. Can you tell us, paano nagkaroon ng shift ng focus?
Nagka-shift when Duterte kind of got this inkling during his presidency that the leftists, despite my overtures to them, including them in my cabinet, they're still not satisfied with my governance, and may naririnig siyang mga parang efforts in the left to not be completely on board with his policies. And then, of course, we know that there was also pressure on him from the military, right? We know that he is actually quite insecure about his standing among the military because hindi naman siya talagang, he never really was, is not, is kind of an outsider in the military in a sense, coming into his presidency. So he was very eager to make sure that he would consolidate loyalty in that sector. So parang yung forces na yun, 'di ba? Parang suspicion of the left on one hand and the military having such a tight hold on him convinced that he needs a military to continue with his policies like the drug war and the police uniform personnel. Parang nag-persuade yon kay Duterte in the end to drop the leftists and completely turn around and say I'm waging a war against you and I'm not counting you anymore as part of my government. So we could see this escalating during his presidency. Diba? In the campaign, he was even saying, "Oh, I'm a socialist at heart. I'm a leftist at heart. Mayor, I'm a fan of Joma Sison and Luis Halandoni." May mga ganun pa siyang sinasabi. I would join mga lectures daw when he was a college or law student. So no, nawala na yun completely. Like right now, his language is completely different. He is now belittling Joma Sison, and he is now saying that campuses are a hotbed for communist recruitment. Very ironic when he himself admitted when he was a student, he would actually join talks like that. So talagang Duterte is the type of president who is very comfortable with being a contradiction, being a walking contradiction. Hindi siya yung type na I said this already, I have to be consistent. De wala siya pake doon. He's very okay with being a walking contradiction, and he's used that in full force kasi now yung main target niya, his main preoccupation, in fact, you can call it an obsession, is to weed the political arena of the left influence, and he's doing this by 2022 kasi he knows that kung malakas yung left in 2022, matatalo yung kanyang mga anointed ones. So he's really on a clicking time, parang may time running down on him to fulfill that promise of insurgency on one hand, but really it's just to weed out any opposition to his power and his allies.
When you mentioned nga yung walking contradiction, I remember start pa lang ng campaign, ng term niya, sobrang yung mga cabinet secretaries niya from the left. And now, about mag-end na yung campaign niya, yun naman yung kaaway niya. So, it's really walang consistency. Any whatever benefits him, I guess, or whatever benefits his agenda. So now, Rambo, now we're talking about the anti-communist propaganda or agenda of the government. And you did a story that you scrutinized the budget or the proposed budget of the NTF LCAC. And your story showed na ang set to benefit from the money is Davao Region and Davao City. So can you tell us more about it? And ano bang significance nito? Why is it important to know kung saan napupunta yung budget nitong grupong to?
So, this NTF funds, talagang this is 16 billion of funds para sa pag-incentivize sa mga local government units sa pag-clear ng communist insurgency. This is their front for this. This is their press release. This is their explanation. We're giving away 20 million for each barangay that has cleared their barangay, their communities of communists. And ang explanation nila, Davao City had the most clearing out of all LGUs in the Philippines. Now, what's grand about this claim is that, imagine, there are 150 cities in the country. There are 1,500 municipalities in the Philippines. So that's a total of 1,600 LGUs. 16 billion. Kung hinati mo yan equally sa lahat-lahat, siguro tig 10 million bawat isa. But Davao City got 1 billion. 1 billion for Davao City alone. That, sabi sa government, because they cleared so many barangays, so they deserve. The question now is, bakit ang dami na clear ng Davao as compared to other LGUs? Example, sa ibang panig ng Pilipinas, marami na clear doon. So may pagtatanong sa kung bakit ang dami na clear ng dapat, ang dami na ipasa sa kanila, pero sa ibang LGUs, wala. And this is something we're trying to ask, but the government has not been transparent about it. We're trying to ask, ano yung other areas that are still at risk, yung mga areas sa Philippines kung saan meron pang communist insurgents, pero nawala.
So, Rambo, kasi when I read your story, ang pumasok sa isip ko is may special treatment ata dito kasi hindi like you mentioned in your story too na pati yung Caraga and other areas in Batangas and maybe Quezon may problema din naman in terms of communist insurgency, pero bakit Davao? And on top of that, naiisip ko rin na yung mga cabinet officials, cabinet members ni President Duterte mostly come from Davao. So yun yung may special treatment ba dito?
That actually is the big question, Camille. Meron bang special treatment ng Davao dito? Anong sabi naman ng government? Wala naman. Talagang likas lang talaga magaling daw ang Davao dito. Talagang nakapag-clear sila ng maraming barangay, nakapagpasa sila ng mga tamang dokumento. Kaya sila ang binigyan ng priority dito, nabigyan ng maraming award. So 20 million per barangay. At ang dami itong barangay, as in mas marami pa yung Davao City kasi talagang mga probinsya kung saan marami din sila clear. So ito yung gusto natin itanong sa gobyerno pero hindi nga sila ganoon ka-transparent dito kung alin yung mga barangay ba na at threat pa at nawala na. At kailangan din natin tingnan kami dito sa perspective na ano rin ito, labanan dito sa bureaucracy. Kasi ang tanong din dito, ano yung time frame na tinitingnan natin na pag-clear ng barangay? Kasi tinitingnan natin for 2020, iba pa mga lugar na nakapag-clear sila barangay. Paano mga barangay na nakapag-clear before the Duterte administration? Paano yung mga barangay na nakapag-clear after ng cut-off nila? So, yun yung mga tanong gusto na explore yun, pero hindi pa na makakapagsasagot na tungkol dito.
Hindi ba parang, the way I understood it, parang medyo may risk kasi may power yung NTF parang over the local government or even the barangays, the municipalities. So parang baka magamit yon kasi ngayon, we all know about the red tagging online and even like in real life, di ba? So parang there's that danger. Plus on top of that, na pork barrel siya. Anong nasabi ng mga na-interview mo about it?
About dito sa NTF-ELCA, kung pork barrel ba siya? Ito
Yeah.
actually pinakamalaking pinakamalaking gripe nila dito sa pork barrel controversy for the NTF-ELCA fund. Kasi sobrang din siya very discretionary. So yung pagbibigay ng 20 million sa mga barangay, wala pa tong set line items kung ano yung bibilhin nila. Bibili ba sila ng ng isang building para sa school? Bibili ba sila ng pagpapatayo ng isang kalsada sa kanilang community para hindi madaling ma-infiltrate? Walang ganon. Yun ay ilalabas lamang pagkabigay na ng pera. So yun yung malaking question ngayon, bakit ibibigay itong pera na to, pero hindi pa naman set ko ano yung mga proyektong gagawin nila. Ang kanilang ginawang workaround dito ay nagbigay sila ng specific list of projects na pwede. So pwede niyong gawin ito, pwede kayong pagdala ng eskwela, pwede kayong paayos ng waterworks sa inyong communities, pwede kayong mag-install ng electricity, basta may develop ang inyong community. Pero bago tong auditing din sa kanila. So ang mag-audit din ito, NTF-ELCA. So ang mangyayari, NTF-ELCA din ang titingin sa mga proyekto ng bawat barangay, may regional NTF-ELCA in collaboration with the provinces, with the region. So it's still quite iffy when it comes to budgetary process. Pero yun yung nakikita natin na problema dito na naipasa pa rin ng Kongreso for some reason.
So Rambo, malaking budget to na hawak ng NTF-ELCA. So, and we all know na sobrang talamak yung paggawa nila ng online red tagging and disinformation. So, is there a threat na or is there a risk na magamit tong budget na to for that? Since it's discretionary too.
Camille, I don't think we can trace na talaga magagamit yung 20 million per barangay to the national policy, national narrative when it comes to red tagging, yung red tag ng mga universities, ng mga activists. But what I can say is that the government is saying and telling the story, a narrative of communists, na kalaban sila, na ito dapat ang pagtrato sa kanila, na wala silang lugar sa mga komunidad, na talaga mga kalaban sila, na ang mga makabayan lawmakers hindi dapat iboto, mga komunista din sila, mga terorista sila. At itong narrative ng government sa taas, ito syempre yung gustong gawin din ng mga local barangay sa baba. Ito yung mga nakatanggap ng 20 million isa-isa. Siyempre wala na silang incentive para pumalag. May incentive lang sila para sumunod dito sa naratibo ng gobyerno. At kasama dito sa naratibo na ito, Camille, ang disinformation. Kaya ito rin yung kanilang risk na pinopursue dito. Na ang mga community na ito, siyempre binigyan ng pera ng gobyerno at saka ng naratibong kailangan sundan para sa mga komunista, para mawala sila. Ito din gagawin nila sa mga communities nila. And part of that narrative is that this disinformation, the intense disinformation on that's happening. And we wouldn't be surprised if this is the same narrative and disinformation that they would be telling their communities, the people in their neighborhoods, their kids.
Part of the reason why I asked that kasi parang on a shallow level, parang nagtry tayo magbutingting nung sa online agenda nila. And we see na parang there's a really great concerted effort. So parang may isip mo lang talaga na, oh, there's some budget for this. Kaya ako natanong. Pero it's good to know na parang it might not be directly used for that, but somehow it ties together. Everything's related to
Exactly.
one. So now we're nearing election. Actually, parang start na nga ng kampanya. Although we just don't feel it yet kasi as reporters, di ba, we're used to covering on the field, like in pagdating sa elections. Pero now, it's a whole new battlefield. And with this coming campaign season, do you think this issue of anti-communist agenda will affect the narrative or the discourse, the discussion surrounding the 2022 election?
Yeah, it's interesting to watch, Camille, because Duterte naman isn't the first president and definitely not the only president who will have an anti-communist agenda or anti-communist narrative. We will see if the rampant red tagging that is unprecedented in his term will affect the election discourse. Kasi maraming sa opposition ang nire-red tag at pine-presume ng mga tao to be either left, allied with the left, communist, allied with the communist. For example, the Makabayan bloc has always won seats in House of Representatives. And in fact, nung last elections nga, isa ang bayan muna sa pinakamaraming seats na nakuha ng isang party list in one election. So we will see kung masisway ba nung naratibo ng gobyerno yung massive support that the left has always enjoyed from the electorate. At titignan natin kung yung pag-red tag ay mag-extend to the other members of the opposition who are not necessarily leftists. Like, for example, Attorney Chel Jokno, for one, kung tumakbo ulit sila, Attorney Erin Tanyada, na who has always spoken up for the causes of activists and who may very well classify themselves as activists. Titignan natin if the anti-communist narrative of the government will affect them to a point na they would, alam mo yun, na they would really be discredited to the public.
What about you, Pia?
I think 2022 will be parang on steroids level ng 2019 elections. And what did we see in the 2019 elections? We saw Duterte come up with this ouster plot matrix where he lumped together Magdalo, Liberal Party, the left, the media. So ito yung strategy niya. While he cannot brand everyone as leftist or communist, he can say that, oh, they're working together to ruin my reputation or to ruin the chances of my allies in winning elections. So Fico mangyayari to ulit in 2022 on a greater level, on a more antagonistic level. And that's why nga yung si Duterte is really counting on his military, his NTF-LCAC to really weed out the hold that the left has in the remote areas. Kasi yung mga NTF-LCAC na yung mga funds na yan, they're meant really for the remote parts where he knows yung mga poor communities could be swayed or could be, diba, in the grips of leftist leanings and could be thus persuaded to vote against him or his allies in the 2022 election. So yun talaga yung gusto niya, to wean them away from that by dangling money, right? NTF-LCAC at the end of the day is a prize money for barangays to clear or rid their barangays of the leftist influence. So he's using the carrot in this parang carrot stick approach yung sa kanya.
And just a follow-up question, do you think pag lumabas yung ICC results, like, or the ICC investigation, do you think it will have an effect on Duterte's anointed one in 2022?
Not so much for his rampant, his very passionate supporters. Fico, he will be able naman to spin it and say, ano yan, agenda ng opposition, politicized lang yan, ICC na yan. So that's why yung opposition will have to be smarter about it. How do they frame the ICC not as a political issue but as an issue that will touch the daily lives, affect the daily lives of citizens, of average Filipinos? How will it affect maybe the economy? How will it affect the country standing to the degree that it can that it will affect the economy? So kailangan mas i-frame nila in a way that veers away from the usual way that Duterte can say it's political and make it more worthy or of attention of the average Filipinos who might not really care about the geopolitics or the international workings of the world, but more of what they care about is the economy and how they will survive the pandemic.
What about you, Rambo? Like for the earlier question about what you think if do you think the anti-insurgency agenda or anti-communist agenda will have an effect on the 2022 narrative discussions?
Yeah, that's such a valid question, Camille. And I think what I can say about that is I completely agree with what Lian and Pia said. For this, I think red tagging is the new yellow tagging. Kita-kita natin from 2016 na lahat ng kalaban talaga sinabi na dilawan kayo lahat, mga kalaban ng Duterte, mga hindi kasama sa agenda ni Duterte, kalaban kayo, mga hindi karapat-dapat. Pero ngayon, nabanggit nga ni Pia, talagang on steroid siya. This is on another level, red tagging. Hindi kayo mga dilawan ngayon, mga pula kayo, mga komunista kayo, you're out to unseat the president, you're out to declare a revolution, gusto nyo maging violent, gusto nyo awayin lahat ng mga tao, wala kayong kapayapaan na gusto makamit. At nakikita naman natin to ngayon sa 2022, going into 2022. At talagang lahat talaga, sinasabihan na na komunista. Dati nga, di ba tayo mismo, Rappler, tinatawag na dilawan kayo media. Ngayon natatanggap natin ng mga mensahe, terorista kayo, mga media pula, kayo kasama ng mga makabayan bloc, kayo mga kalaban. I think undeniable na talagang nakakontrol na rin nila yung narrative when it comes to this. Nagagamit na nila tong red tagging dito sa election issue at ina-expect lang natin na mas maging malala ito ngayon.
Thank you very much, Pia, Lian, and Rambo for joining us and helping us understand the complexities of this issue. Kasi parang I notice, nagiging oversimplified na siya. Alam mo yon, like yung ibang mga, tapos nakakalimutan na in the case of the drug war. Dahil meron ng bagong issue, natatabunan na. So it's really good na binuhay ulit ng Rappler ito because it's really parang, if you look back, like in the future, if you look back sa Duterte administration, drug war is really something na talagang tatatak sa lahat ng tao. So for our audience, for our viewers, please watch out for the third part of the drug war investigation, which they will release tomorrow. Join us again next month here in Newsbreak Chats.